Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Labcoatfitness podcast, more specifically, podcast number 10.
It's pretty
Damn.
crazy, man. We're in double digits, moving along.
Yeah, man. People ask questions, and we're the guys who answer them, you know? So,
That's right. One day we'll even know what we're doing.
one day. Anyway, a bunch of questions for us, so let's just jump right through it, with the first question being by Jeremiah Ross. And he says, what are your thoughts on measuring HRV, which means heart rate variability, every morning, and whether this information is an accurate indicator of ANS readiness for training?
So, not necessarily. So heart rate variability is actually more of a measure of aerobic fitness than it is of anything else. And so this is so in medicine, you probably are familiar with sinus arrhythmia. So basically when you breathe in and you breathe out, it changes the pressures in your cardiovascular system in your chest, which changes everything, the rate at which things are going into your lungs, into your heart, right? And so those pressure changes are sensed by pressure sensors inside the blood vessels, and that is then immediately giving feedback to the autonomic nervous system. So when you breathe in and the pressures go down because you're creating a vacuum, you're actually speeding up your heart rate as a result of that. There's less pressure, so you need more beats in order to get the same flow. And then by contrast, the other way around. And so when you breathe out, your heart rate tends to slow down because the pressure inside your thorax is higher. And that sends feedback that says, hey, let's slow down the heart. And that happens with every breath cycle. We all have this to some degree. Children pretty much all have it. And people with really good aerobic fitness also have it. But believe it or not, a lot of your strength, like the pure strength sports, don't really have a cardio component, and they don't need good cardiovascular fitness to be at the top of their game. And that means that they're not going to really have good heart rate variability no matter how well they are training for their sport. So you really have to understand the context in which different things are useful. What is useful is tracking your progress from workout to workout. And the reason for that is that you have to be making changes from workout to workout if you expect progress, right? So if those changes are building up too quickly, you're going to start seeing that either your performance is decreasing, or that even though you're keeping up, you're feeling crappier after a workout than you did the last time you hit the gym. Like if you feel like this workout was like a 9 out of 10, but the same kind of workout a week ago was an 8 out of 10, then you have to see how the next one goes. And if there's still like a 9 out of 10, you might say, geez, is this what's supposed to be happening? And if not, then it might be time for me to reset my cycles so that I can give my body a break, build back up, and go through another cycle of sort of volume accumulation. And or if you're doing a weight-based program, weight accumulation. But either way, you're going to overshoot things. It's very, very difficult to be perfect without microloading grams at a time. So, and that drives most people crazy. It's not satisfying, and it's more stress than it's worth. So you get the same results basically with much less mental stress if you just do the typical volume cycling. Do a 4 to 8 week program depending on what you want. Build it up from week to week. And if you've done a good job of figuring out what your upper limits are, you never go beyond that. And so you know how to scale it. And that's what we help do through our cycles. So we're actually updating Mass 1 and Mass 2 to more specifically point out that this is one of the main purposes, and that yes, you'll get great results. You will overshoot also, and you need to know what it feels like to get there, because then these questions actually go away, you know? So does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of it's one of those things where is heart rate variability a good tool? Absolutely. But only in certain circumstances. It doesn't really mean anything, and it's certainly not a good measure of generalized autonomic whatever. That's one of those things that people really just are misinterpreting on a day-to-day basis. And, I think a lot of this is because they don't really understand the nuances, and that's like an all-day conversation. I mean, you have college courses that span multiple years, degree programs, and then advanced degree programs to really get people to just have the set of book knowledge. To really understand it and to see it in action means that not only do you need that knowledge, but you then have to take many clients through all these training cycles and watch what happens and see how different things change. And so the bottom line is that if you are doing cardio training as well, then your heart rate variability will let you know where your cardiovascular fitness is. And if things start changing, then something's wrong with your training. Now, what will sometimes give you a little bit of an idea, and this is more of a severe thing, is resting heart rate first thing in the morning. Because the thing is, you can't really put a whole lot into your heart rate variability because it's a reflection of your cardiovascular training. So if you don't do much of that, you're not really going to get much of anything out of trying to look at, what your average highs and lows are. And if you don't have like an actual heart rate monitor that is not just taking a 6-second average, which is what most of them do, you have to have a real-time monitor to actually be looking at it. So you basically need to have like an EKG in front of you to be able to properly assess heart rate variability. And then you have to save those recordings and look at them. Now, if you want to go through all that stuff, you can. It's a good educational process if you're interested in it. So I don't want to discourage that, but it's not really a great way to, monitor what you're looking for. If you're looking for one simple thing, it would be your weekly average of resting heart rate. The thing is, the way you measure resting heart rate is that you need to go to sleep basically with your monitor on, and you need to record it as soon as you wake up, before you open your eyes, before you get out of bed. And, you record your heart rate for typically a minute is what we tend to recommend. And, but, a lot of times as little as like 20 or 30 seconds is almost as good. So if you see that rise by more than, 10% for, like a week straight, then you are probably under a little too much stress. And that can come from a lot of places. You might be underfed. You might be doing too much work. You may be exceeding or approaching your maximum recoverable volume, which is not a good thing. And you are maybe just needing more food and more sleep. Or you may need a cycle reset. So you have to be tracking a lot of things to make sense of these things. And that's why I don't have a lot of recommendations for what to do with that. You need experience in the gym running cycles first before you start adding more advanced monitoring in. Otherwise, you get confused and you don't really know what's important. And as you get better at this and have more experience, you realize that if you're paying attention and doing proper weekly volume progression for your body, and you're keeping up with your food and water and sleep, then you're almost never going to have any issues. The only issue you'd have is if you get sick. So that's what I have to say about that. That's, a little long-winded, but I really wanted to cover that because it's a very interesting question. It's something that a lot of people are interested in various ways, and they want to know what's good. And, I wanted to add a little sort of specific answer and then broader context so that it makes more sense.
Yeah, totally. I have a question since we're talking about that anyway.
Sure.
I had this idea a few months ago. What if I, for example, let's say weighted pull-ups. What if I film my weighted pull-ups at the exact same angle with a slow motion camera, and I only recorded the first rep? And I did that throughout a hypertrophy cycle for 6 weeks long. And I noticed, for example, the recording in slow motion allows me to basically see in milliseconds how much I'm slowing down as I get more fatigued. Would that be a good way of measuring fatigue? Just seeing my first rep slowing down throughout the weeks. Would that be an interesting way of doing that?
Only if you are intentionally trying to be as explosive as humanly possible on that first rep. But there are other things to look at, because remember, hypertrophy is not about performance, really. It's just about getting volume in without causing excess damage. And really what it's about is trying to get to your maximum effective volume and to kind of ride there as long as you can without overstepping it and getting too close to maximum recoverable volume. Because there's your most effective spot, and then there's a space where you definitely can still do more, but you don't get better results. You actually get slightly less progress, and that can be very difficult to distinguish. And that puts you in a position to where it's easy to burn out faster in a cycle. And, then you just have to reset. It's not a big deal. That's a very normal way that everybody at all levels train, because it is the least stressful way to do things. And as you get stronger and stronger and stronger and approach your limits, because you have such a small window of opportunity between what's just enough and what's too much, you tend to run shorter cycles. But that's not something people have to deal with for a long time. And you kind of figure it out on your own that, like, man, I feel like I used to do great for like the last 4 years with 6 weeks, but I feel like week 4, if I go to week 5, I just start wearing down now. Guess what? That probably means it's time for 4-week cycles, bro. But yeah, so you're talking about velocity-based training. So that's more useful for people who are looking to improve their explosiveness, and that has very little to do with hypertrophy.
But my question is more, wouldn't velocity be the first thing that goes down?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so not necessarily. It's hard to say. I think that more than anything else, the first thing that would start going down would be your ability to maintain the same power output. Your one-time effort at the beginning of a workout is probably going to be fairly consistent. Now, if that does go down, it might have just been a shit day. So you can't just run off of that. You have to have repeat measurements.
You take an average too over the week.
Right. But if you're graphing it out and you're looking at it from week to week and you're noticing a trend, you have to ask you shouldn't just hit the brakes. You have to ask yourself, okay, I see this, but how am I feeling? And how's the scale moving? What kind of a cycle am I in? And am I trying to get bigger? Am I trying to get leaner? Because if you're trying to get leaner, your output is going to go down at some point. That's okay. The only thing that matters is basically your skin folds. And then if you are trying to get bigger, the only thing that really matters is what's happening on the scale and whether or not you're getting to a point where you feel like you're breaking down and need to reset a cycle. So objective data is more useful for specific performance evaluation than it is for overall fatigue management. Does that make sense? Now, makes sense. Especially when you're talking about how do I look when I'm fresh, because you're gonna, if you're waiting to see a noticeable problem when you're at your freshest, you're going to allow yourself to really fall into a hole if that's the only way you're making decisions. So there's a lot of other things that need to be looked at. That's one of the last things that's really going to pop up. If you get there, you've ignored warning signs.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting if someone did a study on that speed and how that, the thing I just described, and how that's correlated to how close you are to to having to need deload. And I was thinking of actually trying it myself.
Here's how that's used. There is actually a way that's used, but it's only used for explosive athletes. And the way that this is done is that when they do their plyometric training, when their speed falls below 95% of their fastest speed for the training session, their training session is finished. And the reason for that is that high velocity movements There's a very large change in recruitment pattern over a very small change in movement speed. And because you're looking to train absolute maximum speed, it doesn't do you any good to send mixed messages. And there is actually a learning difference between, hitting 95 to 98% of your max speed and all of a sudden training down at 92%. That actually is a meaningful difference, and it does decrease the value of the training. But that only matters for primarily, honestly, for like track and field athletes.
But you know what? Something I did try throughout the years, and I just did this with no intentions, but retrospectively looking back into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to do muscle ups as a part of my warm up routine.
Right.
I felt like it was a great exercise to get back into it, and it
Sure.
also gave me an indication of how I felt during that session. When I was very explosive, I noticed my session was much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And days where I was feeling crappy, I had a hard muscle up. It wasn't as smooth. And one thing I did notice in my cycles, towards the end of my cycle, when I'm more fatigued, my muscle ups dramatically, lost explosiveness.
Right, exactly. And yet, when those cycles were aimed at hypertrophy, that didn't matter.
It did. For me.
For
mass cycles.
What I'm saying is that you didn't start getting smaller. See what I'm saying?
Oh, no, 100%.
That's what I'm saying, is that if you're... So there's two things that are here, is that one, and it's the reason, and I apologize for interrupting, I try not to do that, even though I'm terrible at that.
That's fine.
But the reason that I'm interrupting is that I want to stay on this point for a second, is that there's a difference in meaning. If your cycle was based on having explosive muscle ups, then you've got to pay very close attention to how your muscle ups are doing. And I do think that in a general sense, you need to know that. But how many of your reps during a proper mass cycle are being done with the kind of explosiveness that you want from a good muscle up? And the answer is basically none.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, does it matter? And part of the problem with certain types of monitoring is that you can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, you go into the gym not knowing how you're doing, and you may feel great, but then you do your muscle ups and you're like, oh man, these were shit today. Maybe I'm just going to have a bad workout.
Yeah.
And then you have a bad workout because you've already kind of conditioned yourself in your mind to expect that. Whereas if you go in and you do them, and all you say is, guess I'm just not that fast today. Let's get to the real training. And then you end up having a kick-ass workout. And that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You did build a lot of volume, and we did not do as good of a job with a lot of your early training of really trying to figure out what is Yod's real maximum recoverable volume, so we could scale back a little bit from that and target that scaled back point as the end of your cycles, which is what we're doing with everybody now. And so as you got towards the end of your cycles, you were getting pretty fatigued, and it's questionable as to whether we could have gotten better results. And one of the reasons that we don't know, and we really couldn't do a good job, is that you also didn't do a very good job of getting the calories that you needed. And that wasn't on purpose. It's just something that we've, as we look back, that's why I was saying, if you're sticking with your eating plan, if you're getting your sleep, if you're getting your hydration, then you're going to have a much better handle on what's going on. If you are allowing yourself to build volume and also not pay attention to all of those other things and not keep them consistent, you're not going to know why you feel bad. Especially if you have one great workout and then one bad workout and then one great workout again, it's probably not your programming. It's probably things that are happening with other parts of life. And and that could potentially be a very inappropriate reason to restart a cycle, because it means every time that you restart, you are going to back off to a point where you're just barely doing enough to make minimal progress. And then it takes, 2 or 3 weeks to get back into that kind of ideal zone, or at least the beginning of what we know is that ideal zone. And then you spend a couple of weeks there, and then you've gone past it. Despite all of our best intentions, we know that we're starting to get past it. And so our best choice is to reset again. And we zoom in and we spread out that variability so that we make less change from the beginning to the end. But so we kind of straddle that ideal zone without spending too much time doing too much or too much time doing too little. And, that's the kind of optimization that we've worked into the Labcoat cycles. And it's there from the beginning. The beginning is figuring out how this works. And that's a guided procedure. And after that, it's about homing it in and understanding how your body responds to different things so that you have the information you need. And, if you have that information and if you are paying close attention, then, and okay, under ideal circumstances, if I'm well fed, if I'm well hydrated, then I know what my cycles should look like. Then you can then say, all right, if I'm pooping out before this, I'm probably screwing up one of those 3 basic things, either food, water, or sleep. So you know where to look. You know what I mean? You can depend on your training cycle once you have personalized it through those initial volume tolerance phases where you test it out and you figure out what you need. After that, you have to look at the things that really do matter. You know what I mean? Because you've already nailed down that one thing. You've been committed. And if you haven't done that, then you're just throwing darts with a blindfold and you'll never know anything.
Alrighty, man. That's enough of that topic. Let's
sorry.
Move on to the next question. Yeah. It was also me. I also threw a question in there.
No, but did that make sense?
It did.
I need to know. Is there more questions about that? It's a topic that you have to teach yourself, and if you're not organized about the way that you do it, then you really can waste years, which a lot of people have.
I think you did a good job.
Thanks.
All right, next question by Simon Hernandez. He says, what are your thoughts on resensitization mesocycles? And is it useful to be used between extended hypertrophy blocks?
That's such a good question. That's a Mike Israetel question for people who don't know. So if you're not listening to Mike Israetel, you really should be. He has really been single-handedly responsible for the most useful vocabulary in all of strength and conditioning. And that's these things that you hear us talk about a lot. It's concepts that have been around for generations, but they've never been really well kind of defined. And there's been a lot of research over the last 10 years or so that has kind of done a really good job of showing the validity of these concepts. And that's the important ones. You hear us talk about the maximum recoverable volume, the maximum effective volume, or the maximum adaptive volume, really, and then the minimum effective volume. So from the beginning of your cycle, we're looking for minimum effective, and then we want to work up to maximum adaptive, and we want to stop a cycle before you reach your maximum recoverable volume, because that's the 0 point on the high end. That's where if you do any more, you start breaking down, but you're doing so much that you can't make any progress either, and that's time wasting. So what Mr. Hernandez is asking is about this concept of resensitization. So the first thing to understand is that in order to need resensitization, you first need to have demonstrated that you are resistant. In other words, if you go through a hypertrophy training cycle, I don't care how long it is. It could be 6 weeks. It could be 12 weeks. It could be 24 weeks. If you are kind of making steady progress, you don't need resensitization. The end. You've demonstrated that you're still sensitive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Now, if you are having problems, the first thing is to understand, and most people who do this, they've never gone through a process that I've never seen anybody do this. I haven't seen Dr. Mike do this with publicly. I'm sure he's done it privately, but I've never seen it put out publicly. I've never seen anybody talk about this. But and I could be wrong. Maybe somebody has. I don't really keep up anymore because I'm busy with medicine. But I can't read everything everywhere. But I've never seen this in a podcast. I've never seen this anywhere. So as far as I'm aware, this is the first time anyone's talking about it. And this is specifically having a structured approach to looking for your maximum recoverable volume. Because if you haven't done that, you don't know where to call a cycle quits. And that's one of the biggest problems that people are having today. They are, in general, we don't really have this in our community, thankfully, because we do focus on a more structured approach conceptually that allows people to personalize things. But in general, people just keep adding volume because they know that volume is the single biggest predictor of long-term hypertrophy. But that's taken out of context. People think that, if I just keep adding more, I'll just keep getting bigger. And that's not true. If you add too much, then you just start breaking down. So yes, you might be requiring more volume, but you don't need that much more from week to week. You don't need that much more from month to month. From 2018 or from 2019 to 2025, you might need a lot more volume, right? But it's going to be added on in terms of like reps per month. Does that make sense? So, and that's with the specific weight, right? And there's a lot more that goes into it that I won't get into because we can get in the weeds on that. But if you notice that your programming that you're using, whatever it is, whether it's ours or somebody else's, if you are consistent with your sleep, your hydration, and your food, and you notice that your training cycles used to do better, and I'm not talking about newbie gains better. If you think you're getting resistant because you've just been working out for 6 months and you're no longer gaining like 5 pounds of muscle every 6 weeks or something, dude, that's normal. Welcome to the real world. The magic doesn't last forever. But if you get to a point to where you have done 6 weeks of training and your body composition really hasn't changed hardly at all, and you have double checked things and you are already good at counting calories, knowing you got enough, counting the protein, knowing you got enough, looking at your hydration, knowing you were well hydrated, and looking at your sleep and knowing that your sleep was where it needed to be, then the only thing left is that your training is now in need of a change. And it is absolutely possible. We don't know for sure. Mike Israetel believes very strongly in this. I personally think that this is true, especially for compressed training sessions, which is what all of us do because we just can't walk around and do like 1 rep every 5 minutes all day because we have real lives. So I think that that's probably a thing. It probably does not matter for the first few years that you train. And Dr. Mike is pretty much, I think, in line with that as well. Hopefully we'll get a chance to, get him on the podcast or get on another podcast with him or something like that and talk about that. There's a point at which it will matter. And at that point, absolutely. And the best way to know is not to look at the calendar. It's to look at your training and to say, well, I've kept everything on point. I'm 3 years in and now I'm just not getting what I used to get. And that is where you are, I think it's fair to say that you are more resistant to anabolic stimuli and we need to regroup. I think that part of the answer is absolutely 4 to 8 weeks of just really doing maintenance volume and doing different exercises. And just, you've got to make some changes just to take the stress off and let your body, calm down. Let it kind of upregulate whatever second messaging systems may have been downregulated. See, the thing is, we don't really know much about what's being up and down regulated during these training cycles because we don't have good data on experienced lifters. So it's very hard to be specific. But it probably is a thing. And if you have really looked at your training then I think that you will be able to say, I need a consolidation cycle, whatever you want to call it, a resensitization cycle. And then you may find, and the best way to find out if you're not sure is to do it. It's not going to hurt you to spend less time in the gym, maintain all of your gains, have more fun with your friends for a couple of months, and then hit it hard again and see if you do better. That is the number one best way to know, because you have nothing to lose and you potentially have a lot to gain. You know what I mean? But it's not it's not going to happen during your first 2 years of training. That I can tell you. When you hit like the 5-year mark, at that point you're so close. If and I'm not talking about 5 years of working out. I'm talking about 5 years of really doing it right, like 80% of the time. You know, if you've really been on point, and then at that point, you're going to have to start doing things a little bit differently. Yeah.
Which is not a lot of people.
No, most people never get there because they don't care. It takes a lot of dedicated effort and energy and time. So, you know, it's and there's no shame in not being one of those people, you know. There's also no shame in being one of those people. It's different strokes for different folks. Not everybody wants to put the time in that it takes to surpass the norm. And that's okay.
All right, let's move on to the next question by Ji Yoon Lee. And he says, hey guys, I've just joined and I'm starting your routine immediately. I do rock climbing and have a gymnastics class, mainly tumbling, once a week.
Okay.
I think I'm strong enough to handle the routine and those activities for a little while, but I'm sure to have to cut out some volume eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have any advice on what I should cut out first on the volume routine?
Well, knowing that you're a rock climber, you may need to treat your pulling volume differently than the rest of your workout. Because you got to remember that, you know, your muscles cannot share resources. The sugar that's in your pecs cannot go to your triceps. And that's really what they're using for resistance training. So if you're doing a lot of rock climbing, then you have a choice to make, and it's a balance, it's a scale. I either do more rock climbing, I keep my rock climbing the same, and I just don't do as much pulling during my workouts, or I do less rock climbing so that I can do more pulling during my workouts. Because your workouts are a more structured environment, you are probably going to get stronger, by focusing on those sessions for, say, 6 weeks and saying that, all right, for this cycle, I am really going to back off on my rock climbing. I'm going to do just enough to barely maintain my skills, maybe even lose a little bit, but my strength's going to go up. I'm going to get better after I come back, and because I have taken the time to build my body in the right way for this program, right? And because if you're doing a lot of that work, then you're doubling up on those muscles. And that means that you may burn out in your workout programs way too early. You may not get the results that you want because you're overtraining without thinking of it as overtraining, you know? And I don't mean like the stereotypical overtraining, like, oh, now you got to wait weeks to recover and like your nervous system's burnt and all this bullshit that doesn't exist. It's just that you're going to be past your maximum recoverable volume way earlier than you think for those muscle groups. So hopefully that makes sense. You know, it's a great question, and I think it's a very realistic question. When you're what is important to understand is that the first mass cycle is probably the single most important cycle you'll ever do. So it's extremely important to make sure that you are well aware of the variables. The real purpose of the first mass cycle is to make sure that we have 6 weeks that are dedicated to gaining muscle. That means really minimizing outside activities. It doesn't mean being a hermit and only going to the gym in your bedroom. It just means that, you know, you've really got to keep your effort levels short and kind of easier than you want in other areas so that you let yourself grow. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Because that's the key, is understanding what you're looking for. And then if you don't really care that much about increasing the pull strength, then I think the big thing is just going to be making sure that you're paying attention to the guidance that we have for the volume increases from week to week, and just understanding that each of your muscle groups is going to kind of be on its own little schedule. And because we've made things easy by sort of spreading it out into movement categories: horizontal push, vertical push, which is really overhead press, and then a vertical pull and a horizontal pull that really covers the entire upper body, right? And then core stuff. And then legs if you choose to train legs. Yeah, because, for people who don't know, gymnastic strength is really all about everything above the hips. And leg weight is kind of dead weight unless you're a vaulter. So, or like a power tumbler or something. So you have to be very selective about where you build your muscle mass if you want to get super advanced upper body, like gymnastic strength. So that's just reality. So we have guidance for that kind of thing. We have guidance for all of it, really. It's just,
Yeah, we do.
Pay close attention and make sure that you know what your variables are. Don't join a new sports league halfway through the program. You're going to throw everything off.
Totally. Let's move on to the next question. This question, for some reason, it's anonymous. Hey, it's a question, and he asks, I have quite some extra range of motion in my elbow extension bilaterally.
Mm-hmm.
Should I be cautious in regards to planche work?
Yeah.
And should I work to only reach neutral elbow extension on the end of my push-ups, for example?
Okay, so on push-ups, yes, absolutely. In planche work, that's really a personal thing.
Choice. Yeah.
Yeah, so like if you look at some, first off, as I say this, I'm going to reference people that you see in the Olympics on TV. You have got to understand that those people are freaks among freaks. They are born more capable than the rest of us. So you can't generalize everything. However, you'll see that a lot of them go past 180 on elbow extension. And some people like Chen Yibing go like 20 degrees past, like it's fucking bananas. But he does, but he did a lot of arm curls. He did a lot of straight arm, arm curl, all kinds of things. And they had a very, very, very specific training program. And so was he in a more vulnerable position? Absolutely. But he was also slow and methodical about building his strength there. And we have very specific approaches for that will allow you to do the same thing. So as long as you listen to our advice on that, you'll be fine either way. I do think that for the straight arm positions, it's probably going to be easier to learn if you use your body's actual normal range of motion, rather than trying to be very particular about stopping at 180.
That tends to be hard.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Yeah. It's a lot of work to try and stop at 180, because most of us, when we do that, it's because our bones don't let us go any further. And so we have passive support as well as active support. And when you're doing it all active right there, it's just, it may be hard. I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you because I'm not one of those people. So it's hard to say, but I think that you'll find that of the people who do it, if you ask them, is it easier for you to hold your planche or your Maltese with that like overextended elbow, or is it easier at a perfectly straight arm? They're going to tell you it's easier at their natural and range of motion because they have that passive support. They're just at an increased risk of tearing the distal biceps and injuring the ligaments of the inner elbow. So if you're careful, and you're not like a super massive person, then you can probably get there just fine, but just like everybody else, it's the same precautions. Listen to what we ask you to do. Don't go overboard. Take it slow, and you'll be okay.
Nice.
But that's a great question. I mean, it's a good, there's a lot of people who probably wonder that.
Yeah, but also people who don't have that amount of elbow extension for push-ups and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go to lockout. You
Yeah.
can just go to near. So that applies to everyone.
Yeah, the reason, yeah. So that's such a good point. Let's tack onto that for a second, because even though
Yeah,
he
sure.
didn't, so he for the push-up part, and this is for everybody. There's no benefit to going to a full lockout, and the reason for that is that when you hit lockout, you really it turns into a more passive position, and you can easily cause problems with yourself there. You can so you can do anything from, like, some people will actually get some ulnar nerve entrapment, although that's pretty rare. A lot of people, when you're snapping into a lockout, that's a fucking terrible idea. Nobody thinks you should do that. They won't. Seriously, like, yes,
I
bench.
know. I've seen so many videos where people are lock, lock.
It's a
And they look cool, but
Well, you know what though? A lot of people, when they see that, they think they're just slamming into a lock, but it's a highly coordinated movement where they're actively slowing down as they get into that lockout. You can't really tell that, but I've done a lot of fast push-ups. I've done a lot of things, and I can tell you that I learned how to float into that position, so that
because
even though it looks snappy, it was not.
yeah,
And
you stop pushing like halfway, and your momentum keeps going, and you're like lock, and then you go back down again.
yeah, it's not a hard lock. It looks like it, but it's not. And so that's something that people have to really, it's not obvious, it's not intuitive. So, and there's no benefit to going there, because when you're in that perfectly straight position, a lot of the muscles are doing less work, which is not necessarily your goal, especially when you're trying to get bigger. And then if you're trying to get stronger, not only is it pointless because it's less work, so it's less tension, but you're also using a heavier weight. So you're in a passive position that is, potentially a great place to get hurt, and you're doing it with more weight. So please don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. So a lot of people don't realize that because they feel like they're robbing themselves of range of motion, but then they forget what the whole purpose of range of motion is.
Right. And that'll be a good thing to talk about separately too, because, the range of motion that you don't want to rob yourself of unless there's a specific purpose for it is the stretched range of motion. But even there's limits. Everybody's built different, so you can't try and look like the dude or girl next to you. You just have to learn what's good for you. And that'll be some of the things that we talk about in later episodes and in specifics, instructional and content. But it is important.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next question by Florian Nagel.
Okay.
And he says, "Hey guys, I would like to hear Josh talking about prerequisites for tumbling. Do you think that there are standards someone should fulfill before attempting tumbling to handle the forces safely?"
That is such a good question. I think that it depends on. So the answer is yes. There's a lot less to do with raw strength than it is about making sure that you learn components of techniques well before you try and do the actual technique. So, for example, before you try to learn how to do a backflip, you should be able to do a really nice, smooth backwards roll where you stay tucked the entire time. Before you try and start learning anything about a front flip, you need to be able to do a forward roll where you stay tucked the entire time. And that is teaching you how to maintain that position during the flip, because that's what allows you to flip fast. And flipping fast is what lets you flip safely. So that would be like the very first prerequisite. Until you learn those things, you really shouldn't be doing anything else. And then the second thing would be, like, for a backflip, is knowing the right learning drills, is knowing that the best thing that you can do is to stand with your butt next to a stacked up pad of foam. And so like those gymnastic mats, or, a tall foam block or something, to where you jump straight up and pull your knees to your chest as hard as you can. And the top of that block is like in the middle of your upper back. And the reason that you do that is that, one, it teaches you not to arch during the jump, because you're going to actually knock the pads out of the way. But the other thing is that when you do that and you pulling the knees up is what causes the flip. It's not arching your back or jumping backwards. And when you do this correctly, you land on your upper back with in that tucked position without even trying to, and it teaches you the right way to start the flip. There are similar things for doing forward flips, and the that's what's important to understand is like for the forward flip, you should not start trying to initiate the flip until your feet have left the ground. Otherwise, you're stealing height. And if you steal height, you have less time to complete the flip, which increases your chance of injury. So there is a sequence of things. And then when you're talking about chaining things together and doing a tumbling run, you need to be able to do a cartwheel, and it needs to be a straight cartwheel. So learn how to do cartwheels on tape. And then you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you learn your
But what about
when you learn
but what ab-
handsprings. So handsprings are where things start to get tricky because you need to have some decent wrist strength and wrist flexibility. And the other thing is that, it really does come down to technique. Like you have to learn to create that range of motion through a combination of the entire spine and the shoulders. It can't just be lower back, otherwise you're going to tear yourself up pretty quickly. And that happens to a lot of people. They also hit the ground too early. So I mean, again, a lot of there's tumbling is a complex thing. It is more about skill than it is about strength. The one thing that really does matter is that you really want to have very, very, very well trained calves when you're doing tumbles that land with you facing backwards. In other words, if you're running forward and when you land, you're looking back the way you came, then you need to have well trained calves because that is a high risk for Achilles tendon rupture. And so the calf training is really more about making sure that you're loading that Achilles tendon progressively and building a structure that can handle the landing. When it comes to tumbling forward, you need to have really strong quads because when you run and then you do a front flip, you're supposed to go up, not forward. And that means that your quads have to absorb all of that forward momentum and redirect it. So there are very specific things for very specific types of tumbling. And then the other thing would be core training because your abdominal musculature is what really creates the motion. So like hip flexors, very important. That's almost impossible to train without abdominals. So, that's kind of why I just say core. But those create the rotation. They also create the stiffness when you're trying to do layouts. So, and then again, they also create the stiffness that allows you to spin quickly when you're doing twists. So, for many different reasons, those would be the things that matter the most.
what about knee prehab and ankle prehab?
Well, I just said you need to have you need to be doing your calf stuff. You need to be doing your
Oh, so
leg.
that's okay. So that's
Yeah,
including that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, like I would definitely do leg extensions, and I don't really care about going deep for a tumbler. I think that those are great. I used to do a lot of those, but I also did a lot of short range stuff with extraordinarily heavy weight that people often don't believe until I hop onto a machine and I can still do like 180, 200 pounds with one leg, despite having not done it in, I don't know, like 10 years. So, but I was just built weird for that. I don't know why I can do that. But the point is that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but it's all kind of basic. And for many, many different reasons, the same things apply. Calf raises, doing your leg extensions. That could be squats, guys, or it could be specific leg extensions. If you're a bad squatter and you don't have a good place to learn and you don't have good people to teach you and it's problematic, don't do them. Do something else. Just train your quads. The one thing that is true for the ankles that a lot of people, especially when they learn when they're older, if people have problem ankles, it is a good idea to do loaded inversion and eversion dorsiflexion, which means that you start at a toe point and you pull the toes back towards you, and they go in one of two directions. You either go up and in or up and out. And that trains the inside and the outside support muscles of the ankle, which is the easiest way to say it. Like more specifically, coming up and in is going to train posterior tibialis, which supports the navicular, which has enormous benefits for knee health because it reduces your risk of ACL injury. and it's also your arch support basically. So the other thing will be that up and out, and that is what helps protect you from rolling your ankle. So there's those things are great. There's a million different ways to do them, and we'll be teaching some specifics. But yeah, you can add those in. Not everybody needs them though. Like one of the easiest things to do to build that stuff up is to do the figure 8 runs, which most people don't know because they didn't play field sports with a good coach. But if you're running at appropriate angles so a figure 8 run is for, let's say that you have, 15 feet. You are going to run on an infinity symbol. So Google infinity symbol. It's like a stretched out number 8. You're just going to run on the border of it. Uh-oh.
I'm sorry.
Are you here? Oh, okay. Sorry, my screens went off.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you are as you run, the faster you go, the more you have to lean to the circle, and that means that you're leaning in the ankles. And so as you change these directions and you run that, you're training the inside and the outside muscles really, really well. But most people have never been told that. They've never been exposed to it. They don't know how to do it right. But it's something you can learn on your own. So, and I can do some videos on that, but that's more of a, smaller niche thing. So I'm not going to focus on it right now. But it is a good question.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome. Let's move on to the next question by Haz. He says, good to hear you guys are feeling a bit better. Could you go into how you keep yourselves relatively active while injured? Also, any tips and specifics you do to proactively help with your rehab? And what do you advise others from now on to mitigate that from happening again?
Yad is doing this right now, so why don't we hear what Yad has to say?
Well, I've been injured many times in my life. And when I get injured, in the past, I wasn't too good at it. I would basically stop doing most things because if I didn't, I would do everything again. But now what I do is I do things I can do. So, for example, let's say I have a wrist injury. A lot of support stuff will hurt, so I don't do that. And so I do all the pulling stuff. And I get to the machines, machines that require only forearm support. I do that. Just got to keep the muscles working. And you just try to stop doing things that hurt, basically. Stop doing things that involve your injury. So that's for the first part. And any tips on how to rehab? Well, that's very specific to the injury you have. So when you have tendonitis, for example, you have certain protocols for that. But the rehab is pretty specific. So I don't know if I can go into that right now. And how to mitigate that from happening again. Well, form is always the most important thing. So if your form is really good, injuries are less likely to happen. And the second thing is, if your training program is very good, then that also prevents you from getting injured. So everything we just discussed in the podcast, volume-wise, very important. Because if you overshoot every time you overshoot, you risk getting injured. And so it's a good idea to not be in a very long state of overshooting. Because then, you just get injured. You don't want that. So that would be the 2 things I would do. And 3, of course, eating more protein and, having enough, well, I should say having enough protein and eating enough food also prevents injury to a certain sense. So just get everything on point is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I mean, to summarize, don't add volume too quickly. Make sure your form is good. If you have, and make sure that you're eating for recovery so that you can recover well instead of recovering poorly. All of that.
Yeah, which means don't cut. Do not go in a caloric deficit when you are injured.
Yeah.
I've done an entire video on Instagram on this, ranting on why people...
Have you?
And yeah, I have. And everyone does this. Bro, I'm not kidding. I've seen so many of my friends get injured. And the first thing they think, well, now I can do a cut. What?
It's like, I mean, I guess you could, but,
Yeah, but you would cut a lot more than fat.
Yeah. It's very hard. It's very hard to still do all the things you need to do to maintain your mass.
Yeah, so of course, TLDR of the video is when you're cutting, you're not providing your body with enough energy, okay? And when you're injured, you actually need more energy than you usually need because, now you fucking ruined something in your body and your body needs to fix that thing. And so chances are high that thing consists out of protein. So you're going to need more protein, to fix that thing. Because you have fibroblasts in your body, being like they're throwing collagen, they're basically being like Kobe Bryant throwing collagen everywhere. And if they don't have that collagen, besides them to throw, then they can't fix you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got to get your collagen. Where do you get collagen? You eat fucking protein. Okay, so stop cutting.
It's just
please.
Another protein. So never cut
and
your protein back. Never cut your protein back when you're injured.
You know what they also do when they get injured?
I don't.
They stop taking their protein shakes.
That's fucking retarded.
I know.
I'm sorry.
Everyone does this.
That was just like my knee jerk. Like what? Yeah, that's terrible. If you can do maintenance calories, but you still need to keep your protein up, and like you said, do the things that you can. Look for new ways to work your muscles, even if it's not what you want to do long term.
Exactly. Sorry for ranting, guys, but that's one of those things that really bugs me.
Yeah.
When people get injured, they just give up on life. It seems like they're intentionally trying to sabotage themselves and like, I got injured. Let's get injured longer. What? Let's make the recovery process even longer.
I think I
hate myself.
The only thing you haven't touched on so far that people also do that I've dealt with a lot, both for myself earlier in life and with clients later in life, is that once people start feeling good again, they think they need to catch up. That is the
so they accelerate their volume building process.
Yeah, you have to actually start slower than you did before because you have to remember something. No matter where you end up, it was not an accident. You may not have known where you were going, but the way you were doing things is what got you there. Unless you got hit by a truck or something, which may have happened because you didn't look before you crossed the road, in which case that's also your fault. So it is. You're responsible for your own safety. It's also the truck driver's fault. But just because, sometimes, like if you just came out of nowhere, look, these things can't stop on a dime. There's other things they have to be looking out for too. But even if it was 100% that truck driver could have potentially prevented that injury, you also a lot of times could have prevented that by not being next to the back wheel of the truck, by not stepping out of those cars and into traffic, by not trusting that since there's a red light, it's okay to look at your cell phone. Like, you don't get a new body. You have to be actively protective of yourself. And that means that when you go back into the gym, you need to remember, you need to tell yourself, I guess remember is the wrong word because it's not like you knew in the first place, but it's time to readjust your mind and say, I got hurt because of the way that I was training. I may have been using good form, but I may have been doing too much work. And it may not have been too much work for 100 other people, but it was obviously too much for my wrist or my elbow or whatever. And so I need to be more protective of that area. I need to go slower. And that's just the way that it is. I may need to use a different rep range for that body part. And that's okay. You have to find ways to succeed, not ways to fail again.
Nice. That was good.
Thank you.
Amen. Moving on to the next question. Woo, I'm calmed down a little bit. Next question by Dan Hughes. He says, hi, I hope you're both doing well. I'm doing well. Love going through these programs. It's amazing. Come on, man. Stop it. This is a question of modification. I live in a rural town where not a lot of club activities happen. Mm-hmm. A MMA club has opened, and it's something I always wanted to really try, even before I got into gymnastic strength. Mm-hmm. But there were no options. To boil it down, could you take the meat and potatoes of the mass and strength cycles and run that side by side the MMA club training?
No.
Or would that be counterproductive?
So here's the thing. When you go to a class, most of the time, they know that people don't do anything outside of it. So they try and have you do a lot of high rep calisthenics and things like that because it's a part. Push-ups. Yeah, but most people who do this, they want to go in and feel like they got a good workout. And most of the people who run these things know that most people believe that if they feel tired, they must have gotten a good workout. So that's going to be what things are based around. But you have to remember something. You're the customer. And you can't just sit on your ass, because then you're kind of the outsider and nobody's going to respect you. At the same time, you don't have to put 100% in when you're putting good resistance training outside this program. Your focus should be on learning the fighting aspects. You should be learning how to move on your feet. You should be learning your wrestling. You should be learning your transitions. You should be drilling, drilling, drilling. That's what great MMA training is all about. That's what great combat training in general is all about. And then there's body conditioning. I could talk a lot about how to build up certain areas for impact, but it all boils down to just hitting a little bit more each day, not necessarily hitting harder, just building up your impacts. And that's the biggest part of shin conditioning is kick the heavy bag, do it to where you can feel it, but it doesn't hurt. And every couple of weeks, you'll realize I can kick a little harder now and it doesn't hurt. So that's what you do. And it just little by little, you build it up. So you're going to have to feel out. I don't really know what the culture is at the gym that you open, or not that you open, but that has opened up near you. So within that, what I can say is that you need to bring extra food because it's going to be a high calorie burn. And that's the biggest thing you got to remember is that if you're working really hard, you got to eat more and you need to do it then. So have a lot of food after that training. If you're doing that, you're really going to minimize the effects, because the cool thing about what they're doing is that it's all going to be high rep. That's what they do because it's what they have. You're not doing 5-rep bench press and stuff. And if you were, you can just count that as a part of your program, right? You can say, well, what are the things I'm doing each week? And if you're doing some of those things in the MMA training, the way that you would do it in our programming, more or less, then, if you're doing the same exercises with similar weight, something like that, then you need to keep track of that and subtract it from the lab coat training. So for example, if they have you doing weighted pull-ups, right? And which they might, I don't know. You'll probably be doing pull-ups, some kind of pull, I don't know. If you are, then that is something you have to take into account. And I would just, the biggest thing about what our training is that you are being guided into learning what you need. So if you're going to be doing the MMA class, and I think that that's fine, you just need to look at, just catalog, what are the different work rates that we're doing for these different muscle groups, right? And your technique training should really never be difficult. It should be done smoothly so that you learn how to move efficiently. So wrestling is going to be fatiguing. There's going to be a lot there's going to be a lot of grip work. There's going to be, and it's not as much pulling and other things as people think, but it's a lot like your arms will get tired. Your hands and forearms will get tired. It's a lot of position control. Your legs will actually get tired, which is kind of cool because you're not doing baseline. We discourage a huge amount of leg training, but that's because that's gymnastics oriented. If you want to be a good wrestler, you need to have very powerful legs. So that's just a thing. If you want to be a great wrestler, the body type you're going to develop will be good, but not great for gymnastic strength, period. You might be a freak like Donnell Whitaker and have giant ass legs and still do a Maltese, but that would be rare. So I'm just trying to be realistic about it. So the bottom line is you probably will need to make some adjustments, but the first adjustment you should make is eat more food after your MMA workouts so that you don't get behind in your calories. That can be a place where you really get behind without realizing it. And that'll impact everything about the lab coat training. If you notice that there's just certain body parts that get worked more than others, pay attention to where you get tired, and also pay attention from week to week about how your workouts are going with the lab coat training. And if we're really updating the guidance on how to pay attention to this. And for you, because you're doing other things, you're not going to be able to follow the ideal guidance. So you're not necessarily going to know what your real maxes are in terms of your maximum recoverable volume. But you will know what your maximum recoverable volume is while you're doing MMA training. And that's just as valuable because you like it and you're probably going to keep doing it. So for you, I would run the program the same way. Pay attention to when you poop out. You're probably going to poop out on pulls before you poop out on pushes, but it might be the other way around. I don't know. Just pay attention, and you may need to slow down on how quickly you add volume, or you may just need to reset that cycle more often, if that makes sense, so that, and you'll see what we're talking about in there. We have specific instructions for that coming out here in the next month or two. It takes some time to get all the formatting right and make sure that, it all makes sense and that it looks good. But in the meantime, pay attention, adjust. If you're getting tired, go back 2 weeks in the programming. So if you get to week 4 and you say, oh, it's too much, go back to week 2 and then build up to week 4. And you may find that that's perfect for you. Just going from week 2 to week 4 for a while is all you need. And you know what? Don't make it complicated. Just do that if it's what works. You may find that going from week 3 to week 6 is fine. You may find, like, that's what I'm saying is that you need to pay attention to how you feel. If your performance is going down, even though you're getting your food and your protein and your water and your sleep, then it's time. You don't need to push through the rest of the cycle. It means you've already gone past what you can recover from. So you need to step back a couple of weeks. And that way, that you're in a good zone again. And that's actually a deload for you. So then you can build back up. And as you pay close attention, build up slowly. Turn that 2 weeks of progress into 4 weeks. So, cut the number of extra reps in half. And that way you can figure out what you need. That's how I would do it. And I would remember that your horizontal pushes may respond totally different than your vertical pulls. Your overhead press may be totally fine, but your horizontal pushes may be crap. So adjust this category by category if you can.
All right.
That makes
Moving
sense.
on to the next. Yeah, totally.
And
Makes
enjoy the MMA training, man. It is super fun and it's super practical. So I love hearing people getting into stuff like that. I'm biased, but I like it.
All right, moving on to the next question by Chuck Pinkert. It's the last question, by the way. He asks, when it comes to a mass/hypertrophy cycle for calisthenics, how important are lower body exercises like the squat and deadlift? I've been taught before that lower body exercises will accelerate the upper body gains. Is there truth to that?
No, it's total bullshit.
And that's the end of this podcast. I'm kidding.
Dude, it kind of is. If he has listened to the other questions, then he already knows that bigger legs are not a good thing for gymnastic strength. Now, they may be a good thing for other things you want to do, and if you need it, then build it up, and you're just going to not have as easy of a time getting a planche, and that's okay. You can't be good at everything. You have to pick and choose, and if you need big thighs to do what you want to do, you're just going to have a harder time with some of this low leverage upper body strength. Just is what it is, So don't let that get in the way of you doing what you love. At the same time, don't fall into this old bull crap of if you don't squat, you can't grow. If that was true, there would not be 1 million people walking around with huge upper bodies and chicken legs. There would be no memes about skipping leg day. You know what I'm saying? Like,
So true.
I just don't know how much clearer to put that.
That's true.
What you train will grow. What you don't train will not grow, basically.
That was just a myth that people built so that people stop skipping leg days.
Yeah, well,
It's oh, bro, you skipping leg days? There's a disease out there.
There's also people, who when they they don't realize that the deadlift does a lot for your arms and your shoulders, and deadlifting is a big part of things. So
that could also be part of
there's very few people who squat but don't deadlift. And where all this stuff came from, there was studies that showed this transient 20-30% increase in serum testosterone that goes away within an hour after.
I remember now.
It's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's absolute hogwash, mate. Absolute. It's garbage. It's bollocks. And
Bollocks, mate.
Yeah.
Is that so?
Absolutely. While I get totally slaughtered for my horrible mix of God knows how many different
British
like
fitness.
yeah, whatever nonsense I was trying to do there. The point is that
Was actually not your worst, man. I've seen worse of you. I've seen cheerio, mate. I remember you saying that.
Cheerio,
But,
mate.
That sounds Australian.
Yeah. It's like Southerners from England, you know? It's like what it's like Australia's almost like the deep South accent of Britain. And they'll probably, that entire country is probably going to murder me now.
Yeah, you're fucked now, dude.
Which is bad
one
because
day
they have like,
Labcoat is
they have like
is
the most
fucking done.
dangerous animals in the world. Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah, they
I don't know
do.
why I did that.
Yeah, you should watch out. You should check your post whenever you get it.
We can
your
never
mail.
go to Australia now.
Yeah, and check your mail every time that there's no spider in there.
I know, right? It's going to be like little eggs. Like they're not going to send a spider. They're going to send the eggs. And I'm not going to know.
Could they do that?
They don't irradiate mail. I should probably stop talking and
shit.
end up on a watch list.
Oh, shit.
How do you think, dude? You know why we have so many invasive species in all these various countries? It's because things came over. They were in shipping containers. It wasn't on purpose. You know, it's just like, oh man, there was like a weed seed in this, and now all of a sudden we have kudzu, or like, you know, and really like a lot of this was just people thought it was a cool looking plant, and they didn't understand that it grew 3 feet a fucking day, and you know, like,
fuck.
So there you go. But
I thought it was check those things. You know, you can't just send. But
they try these days. They are. And so there's been less spread of invasive species, but it still happens. You know?
Interesting.
Nature finds a way, man. Like it was, I hate listening to these people who, this is totally off topic, but I hate listening to people who are making so much sense, sound great. I'm like, fuck yeah. And then all of a sudden they say some crap like, because, you know, everything's got its place and works together to create the natural system. And I'm like, no, they're all trying to kill each other. It's a desperate struggle for survival, and they've just all figured out different ways not to die. That's what it is. They didn't say, let's hold hands and build an ecosystem. They all, the
harmony of life.
No, they all tried to take over.
No, such is the hell of life.
Yeah, it's okay. It's like, you know, but I think that, you know, like belief systems like that give a lot of people comfort. So I don't want to like shit on that. It's just, it's not realistic. It doesn't really it's not a good thing to say if you're trying to paint a realistic picture of the world. However, it does build a really nice mindset, and that's like that's my only qualm with trashing it, is that, and I still will gently, because it's not true, but at the same time it's like the lie really builds harmony. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It's one of those philosophical weirdnesses that is being alive. So anyways, with that digression and deep thought and whatever else you want to call it, plus a bad accent, I think that we've finished our 10th podcast. So thank you everybody for listening to us and sending your questions in. Keep it coming.
Yeah, man. Later, guys.